I spoke too quickly, I guess, because going out the car I had a bit more details about what went on. I thought it was about something else that we had discussed, but unfortunately it was a problem on the chassis. So there was an issue on that side, and we'll look into it for it to not happen again. It doesn't really make me feel any better, because when you are fighting for a win and then you have those kind of issues, I mean, it never happens, but today we've had this problem and we need to look at it for it to never ever happen again, because the car was just undrivable.
So it's not the same issue that was happening earlier on in the season?
No. It was a one-off, so it's something that we need to look into, but I don't think it's something that we'll have anywhere else again.
Did it develop during the race then? Because you got away brilliantly at the start.
Yeah. It was around lap 40, I think. As soon as I started to struggle and complain, it's basically where we started to have the issue, and then unfortunately it got worse and worse.
So it must have been pretty difficult in the car then, because you can't then, I guess, talk about that at the time and tell everyone what's going on. All you're doing is trying to do the best you can, and it's not there for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's very frustrating to have everything under control, to know that the pace is in the car to win, and then you end up being nowhere. So we even lost the podium, so very disappointed.
All right, thank you, Sean. Thanks.
Did you know that Charles Leclerc could have won in Hungary, but ended out the podium for an internal failure that neither Ferrari detected in time? And that FIA sanctioned it hours later? The story is much more serious than you imagine. Stay, because this was not a simple mistake. It was a bomb that could change Ferrari's future in 2025. In classification, the performance was simply masterful. Under pressure, with an asphalt that had reached 47 degrees Celsius, Leclerc executed an impeccable lap. Each curve entry and exit was a declaration of intent. He beat Oscar Piastri for thousandths, but enough to snatch the pole position and return to Ferrari the privilege of leading the grille for the first time throughout the season. It wasn't just a pole. It was a signal to the rest of the teams. Ferrari was not dead. And the most shocking thing is that the team itself recognized that this pole had not been the product of external circumstances. There were no rival errors, no yellow flags to alter the conditions. It was a pure, direct performance, a return to the old school where the pilot's talent and the perfect execution of the car were finally combined. The emotion in Ferrari's garage was palpable. Fred Vasseur, team director, could barely hide a smile when leaving the boxes. They knew they had an unrepeatable opportunity in their hands. The next day, the career Sunday, the atmosphere was electric. From the beginning, Leclerc nailed the exit. He took the first curve inside, closing any attempt to overtake Piastri. What followed was a first phase of calculated race, with Ferrari controlling not only the rhythm, but also the space on the track. The degradation of the tires was lower than expected, and the Monegasque communicated by radio feel comfortable. In the first 20 turns, everything was dating as planned. The dream scenario was underway. On Tour 22, he entered boxes for the first time, riding a new media game. The stop was perfect, without errors, and returned to the track still ahead of its main rivals. It was an indication that even in the execution, Ferrari had raised his level. The team was achieving something they had not achieved throughout the season, leading a race without commitments, without chaos, without improvisations. And in a championship where each point counts, this control was pure gold. Fans, commentators, and experts knew it. Ferrari was facing the real possibility of breaking his drought. Hungary 2025 could be the turning point that would take Leclerc again to the path of triumph and revitalize a team that had been staggering in his identity for years. What nobody knew at that time was that, along with that growing illusion, a fault was being gestated silently that would end all that hope in a matter of turns. The degradation of the performance of the SF25 was not abrupt, but deeply disconcerting. It all started with subtle signs that, in a normal race, could have been confused with a small thermal variation in the tires or a slightly incorrect differential configuration. Charles Leclerc, accustomed to feeling every vibration of the car, noticed that something was out of place just before the lap 40. A small sliding when leaving curve 5, followed by a sudden subviring in the middle sector, were the first warnings. Ferrari did not react immediately, since telemetric data did not indicate a critical anomaly. But what the sensors did not capture clearly, Leclerc perceived it with the body. The feeling of insecurity grew back to return. The car, which had been an instrument of precision in the first half of the race, had become an unpredictable entity. Leclerc, at first, tried to compensate for it by modifying the brake balance and adjusting the differential. He changed the path, altered his braking points, and even tested different mapping modes to manage power delivery. but nothing worked. The degradation of his times was progressive, but more and more pronounced. In just 10 laps, he went from leading with authority to be vulnerable to the attacks that he could previously repel effortlessly. Radio communication, normally mesurated, became tense. Leclerc did not raise his voice, but his tone denoted a mixture of despair and rage contained. On Tour 47, his message was more raw. I am losing traction in areas where we were strong. It makes no sense. Review everything, please. This is not just a rubber. It was a clear warning that the problem was not superficial. And yet, at that time, Ferrari still believed that the situation could be handled with strategic adjustments. What few knew is that the engineers' team was already beginning to notice irregular patterns in the behavior of the SF25. Although the load sensors did not report a structural failure, aerodynamic data revealed a fall in frontal load efficiency in medium radio curves, something totally incompatible with the design of the car for that circuit. It was then that they began to suspect that something more serious was happening, but it was late. The race was underway, and every second that passed without a drastic decision, the possibilities of Leclerc condemned. Tour 54 was the breakdown. Leclerc, after a blockade in curve 12 and a small track outlet, exploded by radio. Not only because of the impotence of not being able to defend himself, but because he understood that he was losing a career that had built return from Saturday. His words, loaded with frustration, were a reflection of what Ferrari did not dare to admit publicly. They had failed to protect their pilot. This is incredibly frustrating. We have lost all competitiveness. They just have to listen to me. I would have found another way to manage these inconveniences. Now the car is practically unstable. It is a miracle if we manage to climb to the podium. From that moment on, Leclerc's career was a survival exercise. Each curve became a battle against a car that no longer responded to its orders. The engineers, now convinced that there was a deep ruling, decided not to risk a sudden withdrawal, and chose to let Leclerc end on the track, but already without real competitive objectives. In the last 10 laps, George Russell was cutting distance like a predator. There was no resistance when he advanced it. Leclerc did not even defend aggressively. It was useless. When he crossed the goal in 4th position, the silence on Ferrari's wall was a sepulchral. It was no longer a strategy that did not work or poorly managed tires. There was something broken both in the car and in the morale of the team. The collapse was not visible in a single image or a yellow flag. It was a slow technical agony that no one knew how to stop in time. And while the spotlights went out in Hungary, the real problems were just beginning to reveal. Hours after the end of the race, when most teams were already packing their cars to move to the next destination, in the Ferrari garage there was still a dense mixture of silence, disbelief and tension contained. It was during that period of post-Carrera technical review that the true alarms lit. The engineers discovered a structural anomaly in the chassis of the SF25 of Charles Leclerc. What in the race was perceived as a loss of adhesion or balance problems, it really had a much more serious root. It was a longitudinal fissure in the middle section of the Monegasque, a failure that directly affected the integrity of the car and compromised its torsional stability. The problem was also deeply symbolic. The chassis is the skeleton of the car, the structure around which everything else is built. That part was damaged meant that Ferrari had left his pilot on track with a car unable to guarantee the minimum safety and performance conditions. The crack would have originated from a minor impact, almost imperceptible, against an aggressive piano of the circuit in Tour 27. In normal conditions, that blow would have been absorbed without major consequences. But the SF25, already indicated in pre-season due to structural stiffness and fatigue of materials under high dynamic loads, did not resist. The damage progressed silently until becoming critical. And yet, they not only lost their career from the technical point of view, but also from the regulatory. In one of the most tense defensive maneuvers of the end of the race, Charles Leclerc was forced to protect his position before George Russell's attack. In an attempt to avoid overtaking on the main line, Leclerc moved his car aggressively, leaving little space to the Mercedes, which was forced to stop abruptly to avoid contact. Although in other circumstances it could have been considered a career incident, the FIA was sharp. The maneuver exceeded the defense limits allowed under the regulation of 2025. The result was a 5-second sanction imposed after the checkered flag. Leclerc, who had crossed the goal in 3rd position for just a few tenths over Russell, lost the podium when applying said penalty in the official result. The most painful thing is that this action was the product of the despair of a pilot who already knew that his car was damaged, that he was fighting not with the real rhythm of the SF25, but against the progressive deterioration of a structure that betrayed him. The maneuver, seen with coldness, was unnecessary. But understood from the emotional context of Leclerc, it was the reflection of someone who fought with how little he had left. The most serious consequence was not fourth or the penalty. It was the feeling that Ferrari had failed twice. First, not detecting the structural problem on time. Second, when placing his pilot in a position where, due to frustration or lack of alternatives, he ended up making a strategic error that cost him the podium. What should be a positive turning point became a double fall, technical and regulatory. From Leclerc's perspective, the day was an emotional disaster. He came from his first pole of the year, had led more than half of the race and finished fourth, sanctioned with an unstable car, without backup of the team on the track and with his reputation as a clean pilot momentarily questioned. The Hungary Grand Prix will not be remembered for a victory or a great battle on the track. He will be remembered as the day Ferrari discovered that the greatest danger is not in the rivals, but in itself. And if they do not act with forcefulness, the rest of the season could become a long epilogue of what could be and it was not.